So this is the black-red Reanimator deck in Legacy. So for a change, I am recording a Legacy deck. This is a deck that I've been testing in preparation for GP Vegas, and I think it's going to be a popular deck there. It's one of the top 5 or so decks in the format. Not one of the top 2 or 3, but I do really like what it's bringing to the table, and it's a deck you have to respect with Graveyard Hate, because these huge fatties can come into play as early as turn 1 and wreck your opponent in a lot of situations. There's only 12 lands in this deck, which is weird. You'll never really see that in Standard or even Modern. But you also have some one-time mana cards, like you'll see Lotus Bloom here and Dark Ritual. So the mana base is pretty straightforward. The bad lands are the key dual lands, and these are actual dual lands here. No drawback, of course, because it's Legacy. And then a couple of swamps to get around Wasteland. The Lotus Petals and Dark Rituals help you explode and have a lot of mana early in the game. So, say you go land, Lotus Petal, Dark Ritual, all of a sudden you have 4 mana on turn 1, which is plenty to enable you to get a big creature into play on the first turn. Chromox, also similar to Lotus Petal, a 0 mana ramp card. Entomb, this card is a way to put any creature you want into the graveyard. So you'll see that there's a little bit of a toolbox if you want to have creatures, and that's because there are 4 entombs, so you can pick and choose which creature you may want to bring back from the graveyard after you entomb it. Then we have our 12 ways to bring back these creatures from the graveyard to play. Each has a little bit of a drawback. So Reanimate, you're going to lose life equal to the converted mana cost of the creature you bring back. Animate Dead, it's the enchantment version, where you're going to bring back a creature, but then it's going to have -1/-0. And if your opponent can answer the Animate Dead, the creature itself is going to leave the battlefield. And then Exhume. So the downside of Exhume is that if your opponent has a creature in their graveyard, they get to as well bring back a creature. But when you compare these types of Reanimate cards to the more modern versions, say a card like Zombify or a Burial Rites even, they're so much cheaper and more efficient. So 1 mana to bring back a creature from your graveyard to play is pretty insane. We've got some disruption, so Thoughtseize is a way of taking away your opponent's force of will or interaction for what you're doing. But you can also turn it around and Thoughtseize yourself as a way to put a creature into the graveyard from your hand when maybe you don't have another way of doing so. Then we have the essential reason to play red. I'm going to keep a lot of hands with Faithless Looting in them, with the hopes to get there, because a lot of your hands aren't made hands. You're missing, say, 1 piece of the puzzle. Faithless Looting does it all. It draws you cards, and it allows you to put creatures into your graveyard for only a single mana. And then the flashback also comes up as well. Then we have the Collective Brutalities. We're seeing this card in every format, and we're going to be escalating this basically every time we cast it, because we want to be putting a creature into our graveyard from our hand. The escalate part of the card allows us to do that, and it also is another Thoughtseize type effect. It deals with Deathrite Shaman for the -2/-2 on a creature. And then, hey, sometimes that life drain swing helps you get that additional Gristlebrand activation once you get that card into play. Alright, so now it's time for the actual creatures. So, Sire of Insanity, this one is one you want early, say on turn 1. And if you're able to get it into play, both you and your opponent discard your hands, and all of a sudden you're left with a 6/4, your opponent doesn't have one, and it will close out the game for you. So there is one copy of Sire of Insanity. The Chancellor of the Annexes, you reveal this if it's in your opening hand, and essentially 4 spikes the first card, the first spell your opponent casts. But then you can also reanimate it itself by putting it into the graveyard, bringing it back, and then permanent 4 spikes for everything your opponent's going to cast. So, and it's a 5/6 flyer, so it can win the game by itself if necessary. The Elish Norn is insane against the small creature decks of the format. Like, if you get this into play against elves, for instance, they can't possibly win. Just shrinking all of your opponent's creatures permanently. Tidespout Tyrant. One of the key parts about this creature is it's non-legendary, so it doesn't get bounced by Karakas like a lot of the other creatures do. So it's going to be good against a deck like lands, for instance. If you're able to bounce cards like Maze of Ith and then get through, that can be pretty nice. But then we have our staple creature of the deck. This is normally the creature you want to reanimate the most. And that's Gristlebrand, because you can get it into play, then get an activation or 2 off of it. And that activation can then allow you to reanimate another creature on that same turn often. If you're able to make more mana with something like a Dark Ritual. So Gristlebrand is often your plan A, so to speak. Moving on to the sideboard, we do have some graveyard hate for the Mirror and also other graveyard decks of the format. Sometimes you'll want Surgicals against Life from the Loams, that sort of card. Duress is good against the Force of Will decks. You really have to take away your opponent's Force of Will a lot of the time before being able to go off and get that creature from the graveyard into play. Needle is nice against annoying, troublesome permanents, mostly against combo decks. You can use it against Deathrite Shaman, but a lot of times you want to just be keeping in your primary game plan in those matchups. So it's mostly for cards like Maze of Ith that are really annoying to deal with. Then we've got Stronghold Gambit. This is a weird one that is basically a show and tell sort of effect. You cast it, choose a creature from your hand to try and put on the battlefield. Your opponent gets to do the same, but the key is the creature with the lowest converted mana cost ends up going into play. So you're going to be boarding this in against decks that essentially don't have creatures in them or have very few, so that when you cast it, you're able to put in your big creature like a Gristlebrand, and it's not going to help your opponent at all. Then we've got Ingature, Artifact Destruction. It's actually pretty important in Legacy. And I like this because you can, say, destroy an artifact, and then sometimes you want to bring this Ingature back to play and destroy another artifact. So you are able to do that with this card. Then we've got the Leviathan. So having Shroud is really nice. Your opponent can't use removal on it. Lots of decks play islands, so the Island Walk is also important. And it's essentially an easy 3-turn clock. Iona is going to be great against monocolored decks or close to monocolored decks. you're able to just choose a color. Your opponent can't cast spells of that color, and most of the times against the decks you're boarding Iona in, that's just game over right there. And then we've got Massacre Worm. Essentially another Elish Norn sort of effect. This one you can sometimes even hardcast. Give all your opponent's creatures -2/-2 when it comes into play. And then you can drain them as well when those creatures do die. So this is the deck. And I'm excited to play some Legacies today.